I think the most important throws are break throws that cut upfield. Like if you're throwing it around and it's pretty soft and wide, it it's gonna gain you a little bit to the break side, but it's not gonna put a lot of pressure on the defense because they have a lot of time to recover from a throw that takes a long time to get to the receiver and that goes super wide, so they can contain that. Um, but if you throw it around that cuts upfield more, the defense is going to have a lot more trouble containing and recovering from a throw like that. So whether it's an inside or it's an around, one that has enough edge and enough shape to drive upfield, and leave the receiver in an advantageous position to make the next throw without a mark or without a defender, is
Yeah, and
probably
like with enough
enough
pace,
pace, enough
so they
edge, enough shape. Um, that's going to be the throw that you know differentiate.
if you're a young thrower, I would say worry less about edge,
Hmm.
worry more about footwork. I think footwork is a huge part about throwing, like not even just stepping out, but like sort of stepping through, like squaring to the space that you're trying to throw to.
And if you're not 6'4" and have 8 feet long arms like Kins, and you can't just throw a high release backhand for free every time, footwork is going to be really important.
I kind of disagree with you there, Mikey. I don't think you should. I think footwork, yes, very important, but
You should work on
understanding,
edge soon,
I think
earlier.
understanding different edges and how to throw them is actually extremely important. I have a funny something
Oh, I agree. I just think it's a little more
Yeah, it's
advanced.
definitely more advanced.
when I was like really, really young and throwing with one of my dad's friends at the Frisbee fields. I was maybe like younger than, not in high school, maybe middle school, very early, like really young. And probably even still in elementary school. I remember, and this stuck with me for the rest of my life. I was throwing with this guy named Spice Man. And we used to do two things that I
Spice
really
Man.
liked.
Cody Spicer.
No,
Oh,
the Spice Man. He used to have me do two things that were really fun as a little kid. One, I had a bunch of energy. So he would throw it deep to me because I would always want to go deep. He would throw it deep to me, I'd run and catch it. I would throw it back, and then he would make me sprint for an under, and he would make me sprint through the disc as like a little elementary school kid, and it would tire me out super quick. That was fun. Then there was another time that he was having me throw like flicks or backhands with like an incredible amount of edge, IO or OI. And every time I would throw it, he would go like, no, like put more edge on it, put more edge on it. And throwing the extremes of edge
Yeah,
allowed me to find the balance of in
yeah,
betweens and playing around with different edges. And I actually think that's really important. Like I think if you're trying to learn how to throw
yeah,
a far IO flick or a far IO backhand or that kind of stuff, you want to play around with throwing with the most edge you possibly can get on it. And it's actually incredibly important because if you
yeah.
can get a ridiculous amount of IO on it, you're going to be able to dial it back when you need to.
yes, agreed. But I don't think you should jump straight into that. You should probably
I
have a good understanding of just how to throw flat and how to
I kind
throw
of
with a
like
lot
what
of
I actually
spin.
do kind of like what Kins is saying
Sure.
though. Like I think it actually maybe I should have like a book club segment. This kind of goes back to a book that I like called Range, um, and the basic premise is do things for fun until you realize that you either excel at it or really enjoy it and want to specialize. And so, like, don't try to specialize early. So, in other words, try a bunch of shit, see what sticks, and figure out how to use
Mm.
it. But I like what Quinn is saying too, and what I was my point being like, if you're not ready to throw that harsh OEO. Like, honestly, Walt had that crazy blade OEO turn in the UNC game. Um, I don't know. Maybe that's a bad. Sorry, that's probably me projecting here.
No,
So
and I understand what you guys are saying. Like, whenever I teach young elementary school kids how to throw a frisbee, I'm not telling them to do that. I always say, like, me and my dad, I learned it from my dad, but we always say, just like throw it flat. Like, you want to get it flat. But at a certain point, once you're able to throw a frisbee, you know, like
yeah.
pretty well, flick and backhand,
Well,
I think you should play around a lot with
For
different,
sure.
extreme different edges and not only just different edges, shapes, but also different speeds as well. I think that's really
oh
important.
yeah, yeah.
So I
Quinn, go ahead. It seems like you have something
yeah,
on the tip of your
just on
tongue.
the edge topic, I warm up with like before AUDL games a lot, I'll warm up with Nut um, on a consistent basis. I wouldn't say it's every game, but it's a lot. And I've never actually asked him what his warm up routine for throwing is, but he does some of like the craziest throws. He's not gonna throw them in game, but he's throwing with inside edge till the disc is vertical. He's throwing blades. He's throwing all types of crazy shit that he's not gonna throw in game. And it's just kind of literally what Kins was saying, but like one of the best throwers
Yeah.
ever does that to warm up it before every game. So that there's something to be said about that.
Yeah, just to feel it.
Yeah.
So you know what it feels like.
Right, and if you
Um,
can do those extremes, you can bring it back. You can dial it
Yeah.
back and throw some very intermediate stuff.
Also,
sorry, go ahead.
how do we feel about the OEO? I'm touch and go with the OEO in general. Mike, you
Dude,
mentioned it.
I was
I'm
going to
pro
talk about it
OEO.
in my throwing, what my most important throws are.
Okay,
As one of the most important throws.
Waiting to go.
Okay, all right.
We'll get to there in a second. I actually want to talk a little bit more about Kins mentioned like I think time it takes to get there. Basically touch.
No, that was me.
So
That wasn't Kins.
Oh, was it you? Sorry, Quinn. When Bob and I were watching the guys warm up over the weekend, because we have a lot of young throwers, there are some things that come naturally, and some of it's even just release points. In addition to time, not even just like a high release or like stepping out, but we have I think he's a freshman, Daniel Bauman. And he has some like natural field sense and throwing sense. One being like say like I have the disc, maybe it's forced backhand or something, and there's a reset and maybe like a sponge or a sagging defender in my lane, just someone off to my left where I can't fully step out and feel comfortable like throwing like an extended wide backhand. So like when you can sort of step forward and like release that backhand kind of in front of you more directly,
Mm.
like just being, I think it makes me think of Pat Mahomes, just like changing arm angles a little bit. That's not necessarily like high release, low release.
It's
Um,
arm angles and it's also pivot angles as well.
yeah,
Like if you throw an around flick and you pivot more backwards, you're gonna be able to throw it around the mark way easier than if you pivot just straight out.
yeah. Rise Up has a good video about that.
Mm.
Like I think Nick Lance did that one. If either of you saw that,
I didn't, but sounds interesting.
yeah, same concept.
Just to sum up what you're saying, Mikey, that bird freshman Daniel Bauman is going to be Patrick Mahomes soon. Is that what you were
He's the
saying?
truth.
Yeah, yeah.
No, but that was a good one. Release points too. Those are the three things that I think you should play around with. Extremes.
Yeah, and so we were talking about though, like we should have focus throwing practices that are more than just like, hey, go get rep. Like we always say focus throwing, but what does that mean? Like some people do. I don't. There's something called ninja throwing. I think Lou Burris put together, and but things like, all right, can you throw it 50 yards? All right, now can you throw it 50 yards, but make it hang or like take twice as long to get there? You know, like maybe Tape needs something like that, right? Because he has so much power and he overshoots people a lot.
Maybe
So time aloft.
structured throwing instead of focus throwing. It has a structure to it. People are
Yeah. So
going through a
this would be great
progression.
if you guys, as great throwers, maybe think about coming up with a nice little throwing workout for our young guys to work on.
I definitely think it's so hard though, because I think it's really up to an individual to recognize what their weaknesses are as a thrower and working on those when you're even just casually throwing. Like that's why I think it's so important to play around with those extremes of edge, speed, release points, pivot points when you're just throwing, because you also never know. Like one of my favorite things about Ultimate is, and it's why I tell people to throw like that when you're just casually throwing, is because there's a lot of throws, unders, open side, trap side, hucks that are very common. You throw them a bunch. But there's so many throws that I encounter in a game where like I see someone open and now it's up to you to get the disc there a certain way with a certain shape, with a certain speed. And one of my strengths is that I've thrown a frisbee a million different ways in just casual throwing sessions that I have it in my repertoire to get the disc there. However, that is
Right.
required. Like I can do more than just throw what normal people are just throwing, easily. Like it's something that I can get the disc to certain places in different ways confidently. And I think just making sure that you're practicing all of those different things when you're throwing, like especially like you're talking about there's just so many. It's why throwing a frisbee is so fun. There's just so many different ways you can throw it. Like you can be throwing with someone who's 50 yards away, and you can throw it super high with a bunch of edge. You can try to rip a laser to them like head height the whole time, and you just never know when you're gonna
Yeah.
encounter a certain situation in a game. And having the confidence that you've thrown it. I mean, because I'm at the point now where I don't think about how I need to throw a disc in a game. It's just like you see the cutter and my body
comes out.
calibrates. It just comes out. Body calibrates it and it just gets there the way it needs to get there. And that stems from throwing a bunch of different ways frequently.
Yeah.
You almost have a dumb confidence on the field, to be honest with your throws sometimes, though.
Idiot.
Which is
It's different, bro.
it's
It's the different.
no, you have a dumb confidence. Like you don't.
You're a dummy.
It's almost like you don't even care
You're a
about
dummy.
the consequences sometimes.
My throws are just different. Like it's just
Kins, before I unleash you on your useful throws, I actually want to mention the around that Quinn was mentioning, around throws, around breaks. I will say we maybe overemphasize hitting the inside too much sometimes, because one thing that Dark Side does really well on the goal line, they throw those stupid softer rounds with edge that Kins is talking about for a freaking goal, when we will just look it off or off a pull play. Like if a lot of teams run some sort of isolation side stack, maybe 3-2, 2-3, whatever, and the mark is forcing towards the stack, and you have to break the mark. And if we're like, I feel like teams limit themselves too much. Like there's another 8 to 10 yards of field to access with a nice shaped soft around. So even if that one is not necessarily getting there with pace to unlock the rest of it, like at least you're in a really strong position off the pole to activate the rest of your offense, instead of having to reset and dink and dunk and then hopefully like maybe counter to the other side when the defense is ready for it.
Yeah, shout out to that. I think his name is John McDonald, something McDonald on UNC. He had a couple of flicks. He had them 2 in a row in the game against you guys, where he threw 2 around flicks, incredibly floaty to the whatever
Hawkins?
break. No,
Oh.
it's the McDonald. He's number 80, and he's
No,
actually
I was trying to think of the receiver.
one of them was to the lefty freshman, and one was to Hawkins. Yeah, and he threw 2 like I didn't even see it. I didn't think he was going to be able to get him off, and he threw 2 incredibly floaty flicks with a lot of touch and edge that floated, and 2 back-to-back points. And I was like, wow. And he's a great thrower. And I remember after playing them in the semifinals last year, he had me working on my kind of like quick no pivot, almost like air bouncy backhand that you just put out there with a little bit of edge and floats a bunch, and you just get it off super quick. He was throwing those relentlessly in the wind, and I was like, I'm impressed with him as a thrower.
Right. That's another thing I'll say about the dark side throwers. They really could change the pace of their throws based on the wind. It was a little crosswindy that game, and it was pretty impressive. Like their away shots would sit in the wind pretty well, even kind of going downwind.
I mean, then you just open up a whole nother can of worms, because we're talking about all these throws, how to throw, practice different throws, and then you add different, directions and velocity of winds. It's honestly, it's beautiful. Like the art of throwing a disc, it really is. It is beautiful, because the art of throwing a disc in all these different ways that we're talking about, and then having the ability to understand how the wind is going to affect the disc and throw it in different ways. I mean, it's the most beautiful part about the sport. Maybe I'm just a romantic.
If calling throwing a frisbee art isn't the frisbee nerd enough for you, then I don't know what is.
No, it is an art. Yes, it is frisbee nerdy, but it is 100% an art. Like, I don't think, obviously, like, Quinn, you just don't get it to the same level that I do. That's pretty fair. He gets it, but it's kind of like, kind of like me playing soccer to like Messi playing, like kicking a soccer ball. You know what I mean? Like with like throwing.
Messi, where the difference between you and Messi is me and you as well.
Just throwing
Oh
a
my
frisbee.
god.
Like knowledge of throwing a frisbee.
Oh my god.
All right, let's move on. Ken, what
Um,
are your what do you think about the OEO?
okay, I was super. Yeah, we'll give Quinn a couple minutes to cool off over there. I remember coming to Bird being super skeptical of this whole Oyo nonsense. That being said, I didn't throw a lot of inside flicks, and Bob got us throwing
Bob
Oyos.
loves the OEO.
Loves the Oyo, and I'm 100% in on Oyos now. I think it allowed for me as someone who didn't throw a lot of inside flicks because I was not confident in the like risk to return ratio that I was getting out of them. Whereas like just throwing it around backhand, I know I'm gonna hit it and it's gonna be completed and it's a lot easier. But the Oyo, I've definitely worked on a lot and added into the game, into my game. So I think that's a big one. I think it's something you can't do on the backhand side that you can really step out there and with that edge get it out in front of the receiver, and it just opens up a lot more space. That you also it's way easier to get past the mark. Like if you're trying to throw
Yeah,
an
that's
inside
true.
flick, you're really
Yeah.
playing around with getting hand blocked because you kind of have to throw it like at the mark. Whereas the Oyo, you're really bending around. So I'm a big fan of the Oyo.
Same.
Obviously, it gets hard in the wind and stuff, but I hit the Oyo a lot now. I'm a big fan. That's one thing. I would echo what Quinn was talking about earlier. One thing I've learned from throwing with Nut and playing with Nut, and if you watch Nut film, he's really good about the pace at which he throws his throws. So not even just on break mark throws, but just even on
His swings. Watch how fast he throws his swings.
dude. That's
It's
what I was gonna say, man.
terrifying.
Dude, yeah, you're telling me the first time I played with Nut, I'm his swing. We're calling the like a host act play where we get sent it up to Nut. He looks downfield for a second, swings it to me. I look up field. I'm turning my head. This thing is coming at me like 50 miles per hour. I almost dropped it. I was like, dude, no, you're insane. But it really helps, just now I have the disc that much quicker. I'm able to have that much more time to read the defense, those types of things.
Yeah.
So
So
that's really
Bob
important.
says beat the defense with speed, right? Get the
Mm-hmm.
throw there with pace. There is a fine line, right? Though, because some people who don't have control over the pace, like they'll just be fucking ripping it at you like a Huck while you're cutting under. Like Nut
Shout
definitely
out
can.
Fruge, man.
Michael
I know you're thinking of
Oh,
him,
Froggy
Chris.
boy.
Shout out Fruge, man. Shout out my boy Michael Fruge ripping 50 mile per hour hucks, man. I'm sprinting under. I got a defender on my back. This thing's coming at my fucking face. Hot.
Michael
It's
I
Michael
crazy.
totally feel
Frugier
with that
broke my
guy.
pinky with an under. I'm not even kidding.
That guy, man. I love
That's
that
what
guy.
you should be working on, kids. So yeah, that's really big. And that's something now that I'm still actively working on and trying to implement into my game and it just takes a lot of focus and it's going to, require some focus for me like at practices and in games is breaking the mark and getting more yards off it, getting it there a little quicker. Because if I apply myself with the length and stuff that I have, I can do it. I think a lot of times I settle for the conservative, like I'm just breaking the mark, getting the disc out there. It's going to be a reception. But I think pressing the envelope of getting the disc farther downfield, quicker, getting more yards off the break will really be advantageous for the defense. I mean, for our offense and suck for the defense. So I think that's a big one. I think another really important throwing thing, and I've been working on this a lot with the freshmen of Bird and some people, and I think if you watch
Wait,
good
do
players,
we need to add you to the coaching staff? You might
I
sit
do
in more
like
than I do.
little separate skill sessions with them. I try to stay connected with the young guns. But it's super important is the shape at which you are throwing your hucks and the placement to where you are putting them on the field. Like this is something that shocks me that it's not
Yeah.
already something that's a given at a higher level in ultimate, but you will see it so often that it's not. But throwing,
Yeah.
if it's forced flick and I have the disc on the sideline, throwing my flick diagonally across the field to the space that is now my offensive player is in between the disc and his defensive player, basically
Where the
putting it.
defender has
To
to
the break side.
backtrack. Yeah,
Yes,
it's
you're
a
throwing
flip
it to the
fade
break
throw.
side, and you're still like you're throwing it over their head, so it's an open side throw. You're throwing it to the break side, and that is just so important and
Like an
something that
OEO Huck kind of.
kind of like an oil huck, but you do it with the Yeah, sure. I mean,
And you don't
definitely it
want it to
has
be
that.
you do have to find the edge. And this is why, again, working on your edge control is so important, because
Right.
if you blade that, it is
And I mean,
tough.
And I mean, if the mark is allowing me to, like, for example, the bomb that I threw Quinn at Nationals, I just threw an inside out
That was
backhand
just
to that.
flat. Well, yeah, yeah.
Well,
It
it
was
was
blue. It
inside and to
it's
the
blue
other
flat.
side of the
Yeah, yeah.
field. And that was because the mark was just so far around that I was able to do that. So, like,
Right.
that's an extreme example of like, okay, Quinn's defender was to the left of him and I threw it really far out to the right. But if the mark had been a little more straight up, I would have just thrown an outside in backhand that faded to that spot still. But just like that is such an important part of knowing how to be more efficient with your throws is getting the disc to those spaces where you're just giving your receiver a better spot to get it. Like yeah, it's just so important. And you're
Would
really
you would you sorry to interrupt. Would
no
you
no
include like a shimmy as part of throws, or is that a
yeah
separate thing?
Yeah.
for sure. I mean that's I think it's definitely related. It's like into moving the mark, which is very important and a very valuable skill. Definitely to set up your
But
throws.
but
Um,
let me talk about that for a sec. Like if you watch Jimmy comes to mind on this one. It happens to
right.
Nut too. Like when you're a thrower of that caliber, you start to get flat marks 24/7. So even if you're throwing an open side huck, you probably have to do some type of shimmy. Like if you watch Jimmy throw a huck to the open side, he aggressively shimmies that flick before he throws it, like every time. And if you watch Nut do it, Nut doesn't shimmy per se, but he like twists his body a little bit and looks to the break side to get the mark to jump that way to throw the open side because all of their marks are always flat.
So one thing that I was trying to get tape to work on this weekend too is like if you catch the disc kind of in the backhand pivot already where you're extended and then try to huck from that position, it's tough to get the power. Like we call that the load step, but um, with tape, I think there's also the added thing that the mark is over there. And when Nut catches a backhand, he almost always squares back to like a default home position, and then he pivots out to rip the backhand. And he does
Yeah.
this like so efficiently.
Yeah. And that's exactly what I did on the one I threw to Calvin in the finals. I threw the backhand fake, saw that it wasn't necessarily respected by the defense, came back to the center, and then proceeded to rip a fucking bomb backhand over
Right.
some. I don't even remember who was guarding Calvin on that play. I don't think they were very good,
Yeah,
but
I don't know who it was either.
I don't remember.
Might have
But
been player of the year, but I
um,
can't remember.
Yeah.
was it the player of the year? Who was? Nah. Anyway, jokes aside.
Let's not get into it.
No, but that is super important. And then so I just think those shapes and getting it. And I mean, it's even like, when it's even stuff as little as when you're throwing with a partner, like I'm even, you know, you're considering like what shoulder you want to hit when you throw to them, because those are also things that all these little things like add
Yeah.
up into you having less turnovers throughout a tournament, throughout a game, and making sure like when I'm throwing a flick or a backhand or an inside and around, just warming up with someone, I'm aiming
For a
to
shoulder.
hit a shoulder, right? Like I'm throwing the inside, I want to hit the left shoulder. And I think most good players are doing that.
Yeah.
It's just important to be visualizing those things when you're
Yeah.
throwing. And those shapes are so important.
Alrighty. Any other like specific throws before we bounce around?
No, those are my big ones. I do think the Oya is important. I do think the shape of because and Nuts talked about it is getting it, and I've been talking to the freshmen about it, is like when you're throwing the flick or the backhand with the OI edge as a huck, but also getting the nose or the front of the disc up a little bit so that instead of blading in really harshly, the
Yeah.
disc is
Kind of
kind of
sits.
sit or like tabletoping in,
Yeah.
still edging
I'll
to that
give
side, but
I'll
it's
actually
very
give
important.
I'll give Quinn a little shout out here. Nanda over the weekend had he has this really nice round flick huck on like from the wide flick side, so the right sideline that he can throw. So he stepped around, he threw this huck, and it had the wrong edge. Well, he always throws with edge. It was too blady, hit the ground too far, and Calvin was giving him some tips and said like when Quinn throws this, it's similar, but the nose of the disc, right? It's tilted so that it won't just die and just dive into the ground, but can sit out there for longer and let a receiver run onto it.
I'm blushing.
Mikey, you misspoke.
I'm
I
blushing.
think you said Quinn. I think you meant to say. No, I'm fucking around. Honestly,
That's my throw.
Quinn's
That's my
development.
throw.
No, it is. And your development as a thrower, and this will be my last compliment, and then we'll stop dick eating Quinn. But Quinn's development as a thrower, I would say I don't think I've seen, and obviously I've been here for a while, but no one else has developed and improved their throws. Like you, I did
Seriously?
not
You picking Quinn?
Yeah, I did not. Who
You thought
else
he was
has?
well, I don't know. Did you think he was a bad thrower when you?
I didn't really consider like Quinn like a good. No, like Quinn has stepped into like being a legitimate dual threat player at the highest level of the game. Whereas like my freshman year, I was not considering Quinn's like flicker backhand hucks to be like that of that level. I don't know. Maybe I'm just wrong, but I'm pretty
No,
confident in that.
I think I agree with you.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Well, I'm glad that everybody. I'm glad that we have Quinn on our team. How about that?